Okay, this is chapter 2.3 of the portable solar power system, the inverters and the fuses. Now, the portable solar system has two inverters installed on the inverter shelf. The one on the right is a 2000 watt Xantrex PROwatt SW 2000 true sine wave inverter, and the inverter on the left is a 1750 watt Xantrex 1750 plus modified sine wave inverter. The true sine wave or pure sine wave inverter produces clean AC power with a true smooth sine wave like the power company delivers to your house. A modified sine wave inverter is about half the price and produces a flattened wave at the high and low points of the sine wave. This power is not as clean, but is still sufficient to run some electronic devices, with the exception of those requiring sensitive calibrations. I plan to use my modified sine wave inverter rarely with dumb devices when I am pushing the limit on the true sine inverter. Each of the inverters has a 6-foot positive 0 AWG gauge wire leading from the battery bank to the input side of the fuses. Now, on the true sine wave inverter, the 2000 watt, I'm using a 250 amp fuse, and on the 1750 modified sine wave inverter, I'm using a 200 amp fuse. There are 18-inch 2-gauge wires leading from the output side of the fuses to the inverter's positive post. Now, the 6 negative 0-gauge wires go directly from the battery bank to the negative post on the inverters, and I'll show you that in just a moment from the rear of the battery box or the inverter shelf. The portable solar power system uses a 30 amp smart controller that I showed you on the last video. Now, my charge controller is not an MPPT charge controller, it's just a more of a basic system. Okay, here's a look at the back of the battery box. This is the inverter shelf. On the left there you see the pure sine wave inverter, and on the right you see the modified sine wave inverter. There are the two positive leads coming up from the batteries going to their fuse compartments, and the negatives are on the other side there, you see. Inside here we have a 250 amp breaker, or actually a fuse, and that's for the true sine wave inverter. On the other side we have a 200 amp fuse. Now let's talk a little bit more about modified sine wave as opposed to true sine wave. I have one of each. On the left is a modified sine wave, and on the right is a true sine wave. Now, if at all possible, if you can only buy one inverter, do buy a true sine wave. And I'm going to give you a little demonstration here. This is just a standard box fan on the medium setting. And first we're going to plug it into the true sine wave inverter. And you can hear it's just as a nice clean running motor, what you would expect when you plug this into your house. Now let's take it out here and we'll now plug it into the modified sine wave inverter. Now you can hear that buzz. It's just not as clean a power. Now that is something that will drive you insane at night when you're trying to sleep. Trust me, I've done it before. Now, the obvious difference between the two is the price. The pure or true sine wave inverters usually cost about twice as much as the modified sine wave inverter. The modified sine wave inverter is the most commonly used inverter on the market, and you have to presume that is due to cost. Now, having both on my inverter shelf here has allowed me to test various devices. I've tested several typical electric power tools, including a circular saw, an electric jigsaw, a drill, a router, a palm sander, and a reciprocal saw. I found no real discernible difference between modified and true sine wave inverters for those types of things. I also tested an upright vacuum cleaner, and the motor on the vacuum sounded like it was pressured when I was using it with the modified sine wave inverter. It was perfectly clean like you would expect out of your home with the true sine wave inverter. I also tested a 32-inch Vizio flat panel television, and there was really no discernible difference with that television between the true sine wave and the modified sine wave inverter. All right, just a quick note on 12, 24, and 48 volt systems. Obviously, if you're trying to run a complete house, you're going to need a 24 or a 48 volt system. I've gone for a 12 volt system here simply because I'm just trying to power a few things in an emergency situation. I want to keep a couple of chest freezers going. I want to be able to run a television and a radio and some box fans and some lighting and just some basic things. I'm not trying to run my air conditioner. Unquestionably, the 12 volt system is the most sensible and cost effective solution for a small to medium sized system. Obviously, there are advantages to the 12 volt system because you can use all of these 12 volt devices that were developed for automobiles and motor homes, etc. So if you're trying to run an entire house, this is not the system for you. Okay, you're going to be wanting to power lights and devices throughout your home, so you will need some extra materials to do this. During an emergency or a collapse where the just-in-time delivery system is disrupted, the store shelves will be empty in a matter of days and no one knows how long that's going to last. Some people may plan to use the wires and the switches and the receptacles that are already installed in their homes, but I've decided to run new wires and install temporary receptacles, switches, and lighting. I plan to leave the breaker panel alone so that I can resume using the power company's electrical system if or when it is ever restored. So while the stores are still open, consider a couple of 100 feet of Romex wire. Consider 10 to 20 mounting boxes, both for light switches and receptacles. Consider 10 to 20 dual power receptacles and faceplates. Consider light switches. Several clamp lights with the aluminum reflectors. These lights are really inexpensive. They deploy quickly and they provide great light using low wattage compact fluorescents. As a matter of fact, above all, you need long-term storage of compact fluorescents and or LED lights. You never want to use incandescent lighting as it's just too taxing on your batteries. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the inverter and fuse section of the portable solar power system. Next, we're going to discuss the battery maintenance and solar power sizing. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.